Hey History Heroes, this is part 2 of our Amistad story. Part 1 I will link up here in case you haven't seen it, but for those of you that have, let's begin our story. Now, before I start talking about the Supreme Court case, I do need to introduce you to one more person, and he was extremely important. His name was John Quincy Adams, or 𝐓𝐞𝐬 for short. John Quincy Adams was the 6th president of the United States, and son of, yes, John Adams, the 2nd president of the United States, who also happens to have been a founding father. His mother was Abigail Adams, who is considered a founding mother, as well as being probably one of the coolest women you've never heard of. Needless to say, 𝐓𝐞𝐬 had a lot to live up to. Side note, if you are interested in John Adams or Abigail Adams, I highly recommend watching the HBO show John Adams, which I will link down in the description below. It's a story about the founding of the nation, but also about how cool John Adams was, and of course, it does feature 𝐓𝐞𝐬. John Quincy Adams is considered to be one of the greatest diplomats in history and would have been considered a successful president had he not been chokeholded by his own Congress, who harbored fears that he was actually an abolitionist. They were probably right, and due to his views and the fact he was a successful attorney, he decided to take on the Amistad case. Take that, Crazy Eyes Calhoun. On February 23rd, 1841, Attorney General Henry Glippin began the oral argument phase of the prosecution, stating the Africans were actually Cubans as evidenced by the documents provided by the Spanish. Of course, these documents were later proven to be forged. Baldwin fired back, arguing the Spanish government was manipulating the court into obtaining those that had already been freed by the district court. John Quincy Adams gently reminded the court that they were still, in fact, part of the judicial branch, not executive. He also reminded them that a treaty with a foreign power does not take precedence over the U.S. principles of, dare I say, unalienable individual rights. 𝐓𝐞𝐬 was an excellent orator and would even make subtle flexes to his own founding father. At one point, during his 8.5-hour-long speech, he pointed to a copy of the Declaration of Independence on the wall and said, "I know no law, statute, or constitution, no code, no treaty, except that law, which is forever before the eyes of your honors." He finally rested his case, having presented the true account of the Mendy and the legal implications of the case. On March 2nd, the court retired to consider it. 1 week later, the Supreme Court made their decision. The ruling declared that the Mendy were unlawfully kidnapped and forcibly and wrongly carried on board a certain vessel. The documents presented by Attorney General Glippin were not evidence of property, but rather fraud on the part of the Spanish government. The Africans were finally free, but the United States government did not need to aid them. However, there were those who felt that they did. Welcome to the Grand Central Station of the Underground Railroad in Farmington, Connecticut. You wouldn't know it now, but in the 19th century, this was one of the most important abolitionist towns in the United States. This is the First Church of Christ, whose members supported the Africans throughout their stay in this town, and where 𝐓𝐸 even gave several speeches. The Africans were welcomed with open arms here, and while money was being raised for them to return home, they created a temporary home here. The men lived in their own home, and the children stayed with Farmington families. They attended school, attended church, they had clothing sewn for them by the community, and they practiced their English. And though people thought they had a lot to learn, it appears the Americans were actually the ones who were uneducated. Upon seeing the people of Farmington trying, and failing, to grow non-native crops like rice, many who were rice farmers back home took it upon themselves to teach the Farmington farmers. They also grew rice themselves on their own plot of land, staving off the homesickness in small ways. Additionally, they spent time speaking to professors about their language and culture, which at that time was relatively unknown. Their story, along with their personal biographies, was published in a book around that time, and I will link it down in the description below. Finally, in 1842, it was time for their final freedom. It was time to go home. Enough money had been raised and the journey had been arranged. But they weren't traveling alone. Several missionaries decided to start a charitable mission in Sierra Leone with the help of the Africans. But not all Africans were able to return home. Some died in America, waiting for their trial. Others died after they were free, like 𝐓𝐿𝐻𝐿. He drowned while bathing in a basin near this site and was buried along with many abolitionists here in Riverside Cemetery. Today, a headstone, plaque, and marker honor him and his companion's story. When the Africans arrived in Sierra Leone, most were able to return to their families, though some did continue to maintain contact with the mission and with people back in America. Sadly, it is also possible that some went into trading slaves themselves due to the difficult economic situation. However, one of the Africans, a girl named 𝐓𝐢𝐻𝐬, stayed with the missionaries and eventually went back to the United States, and she even obtained her degree from Oberlin College in Ohio. She became the first African to ever graduate from an American college. Even after the Africans returned home, Spain continued to pester the United States, saying they were owed compensation for the Amistad, cargo, and so-called slaves. Congress tried and failed for many years to pass a resolution for their compensation, and even had the backing of Presidents Polk and Buchanan, but the money failed to manifest. Take that, Spain. Now, despite a Steven Spielberg movie in which Djimon Hounsou gives the performance of his life and was robbed of an Oscar nomination, a literal one-for-one replica of the Amistad itself, and countless resources out there for teachers and history heroes alike, this story is still relatively unknown. It has international significance and monumental social themes that should be taught in every classroom. But even more important than that, this is the story of people. This is the story of 𝐓𝐤𝐻𝐸, who at the age of 25 became not only a leader, but a symbol of hope to those who needed it most. His portrait remains one of the first and most important depictions of an African in American art. This is also the story of 𝐓𝐿𝐻𝐿 and his father, 𝐓𝐸, who proudly told any who would hear of his leopard hunting skills and the leopard skin that hung up in his family hut back in Sierra Leone. And this is the story of 𝐓𝐷𝐻, who dreamed of having a wife, so his mother made him 10 bolts of cloth to give as a dowry to his future bride. This is their story, and it needs to be told. Hey history heroes! Before I end this video, I wanted to give you a different perspective on the Amistad, because while I am telling you this story, there are others who know much more than I do. So, here is an interview with the senior educator at Discovering Amistad, who owns the schooner Amistad replica and runs tours and programs to educate people on its story. Enjoy!
My name is Jason Hein. I work with Discovering Amistad, and this is the Amistad that we're on right now. I am the senior educator in charge of curriculum development and teaching in the classroom. But I also work here on the boat as a sailor and as an onboard educator. Discovering Amistad is in charge of Connecticut's flagship, the Amistad, which is a recreation vessel of the 1830s Amistad. And the mission of Discovering Amistad is to teach the story of the Amistad Rebellion in 1839 and all the events that surround it, but also to get students and the public thinking about what that history means to us today in terms of contemporary issues of racial injustice. But when they came to New London, it was a sensation. I mean, everybody was talking about the story of the Amistad. In the North, also remember that there were many abolitionist newspapers. That is, news media outlets run completely by opponents of slavery. They picked up on this story and ran with it. So they really helped to promote the story of the Amistad Rebellion. And then, of course, the subsequent trials. So in the Northeast, it was absolutely a hotbed issue. And then, of course, because of Spain's involvement, it also became an international story, as many slave uprising stories were of a national interest. Great Britain, in particular, was an abolitionist nation, and they also had an interest in the story. So it certainly brought many countries together in sharing that interest. In terms of the Supreme Court case, it changes nothing for the millions of black slaves in America. They continue for another 25 years to be enslaved, till the Civil War begins in 1860 and ends in 1865. That's what's going to change everything. But it's certainly not the Amistad case. What it did serve to do was really bring together abolitionists and those that were interested in fighting racial injustice. It brought them together and really encouraged them and inspired them. I mean, with this win and with the freeing of the Amistad Africans, I think really emboldened them to really continue to move forward and to continue to find ways to support black lives. I think the Amistad story should be taught in all classrooms. One of the reasons is that there's a wealth of information. No other story, I think, was so present in the news media and the newspapers. There were no cameras in 1839, and yet we have a number of images of the Amistad Africans as they were drawn by a local artist. Those are at the Yale archives. Just an endless amount of primary sources, very rich in content. So it makes it really easy for students to study up on this issue and on this story. Another reason I think it should be taught in all schools is the lessons on what people can do when they organize. And I think in the 1830s, the abolitionists had to organize to rally around this monumental effort to free the Amistad Africans. That level of organization, how they come together and bring together all these resources in order to make sure the Amistad Africans receive justice, is a really important lesson to learn. And also, the story of how the Amistad Africans, who don't speak any English or Spanish, have to come here and navigate the United States court system is a very unique story. And yet they're still able, in many ways, to really guide that effort to defend themselves and to seek justice. So I think for those and other reasons, I absolutely think it should be taught in schools. The Amistad story is near and dear to me, and I hope other people think so too.
Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that interview and, of course, this episode from Time with Tempest. And if you want to learn more hidden history, make sure to subscribe, bang that bell, distribute your delight, and leave your calling card in the comments below because the YouTube algorithm gods demand it. And I wanted to give a huge shout out to Discovering Amistad, who not only let me go on the Amistad itself, but have that amazing interview with the senior educator. I hope that you got something out of it. I hope that you're curious about the story of the Amistad. And if you are, I will leave a link to their website down in the description below so you can check out what they're all about. I highly recommend, if you're in the area, that you check out the Amistad and all it has to offer. And until next time, stay curious, history heroes.